The news coming out of Venezuela is awful, and this is not the first time that the U.S. has overthrown a government in South or Central America. So let's talk about the lesbian journalist who snuck into Guatemala in 1954 to break the story of the U.S.-backed coup that overthrew President Jacobo Árbenz Guzmán, Evelyn Irons. Welcome back to Yesterqueers. My name's Amanda, and I'm a public historian of queer history. Evelyn Irons was born June 17, 1900, in Glasgow, Scotland. According to her friend and colleague Cal McChrystal, she was close to her father and indifferent to her mother. After graduating from a prestigious school called St. Bride's, she went on to Somerville College at Oxford to become, in her words, a great writer. By the time she graduated, she was fluent in French, had a box full of awards and commendations, and was desperately short on cash due to the death of her father. After working a series of odd jobs in London, Irons was named as the woman's page editor for the Daily Mail in 1927. It wasn't a great fit for her. She didn't cook and she didn't care about fashion and she didn't wear makeup, but it did give her the opportunity to interview Vita Sackville-West in 1931, sparking a passionate affair that eventually came to also include Irons's girlfriend at the time, Olive Rinder. Historians often refer to their relationship as a ménage à trois, but I think we'd probably just call them a throuple. It was a short-lived affair, though. Evelyn met the love of her life, actor and writer Joy McSweeney, in 1932, and promptly dumped both Vita and Olive, although in true lesbian fashion, Vita and Evelyn remained lifelong friends. Irons moved on to the Evening Standard in 1935, but by 1939 she was fed up with just covering women's issues. Using the start of World War II as motivation, Irons, who Victorian Glendinning describes as a little bulldog for her tenacity, marched into the news editor's office at the Standard and announced that she worked for him now. She was sent to France and then Belgium as a war correspondent, but British commanders would only allow her to report from the hospitals. So she accredited herself to the French First Army and crossed the Rhine with Charles de Gaulle. She was one of the very first journalists to enter Paris after its liberation. Irons was also embedded with frontline French troops as they moved through Germany and Austria. She even captured a Bavarian town with 3 other journalists. In her own words, "We somehow got ahead of the advance, and 4 of us in a jeep came to this village and found no Allied troops had arrived, so we took it ourselves. We were armed. The French would have none of this nonsense about war correspondents not carrying weapons, so we held up everyone at gunpoint and accepted their surrender. Then we helped ourselves to all the radios, cameras, and binoculars we could find and drove off." When Hitler's Eagle's Nest was captured in 1944, Irons was reportedly the first journalist to reach it by climbing up the side of the mountain in the snow rather than waiting for the destroyed lift to be repaired. Upon arrival, she found the cellar first and reportedly helped herself to a bottle of Hitler's excellent Rhine wine. For her courageous work during the war, Evelyn Irons was the first woman ever to be awarded France's Distinguished Croix de Guerre with Silver Star. Irons continued her daring work after the war. There are literally dozens of stories, but my favorite is her reporting on the Guatemalan coup. So when Guzman was elected as the 25th president of Guatemala in 1951, he ushered in a huge number of social reform policies, like expanding the right to vote and giving workers the right to unionize. But by far, his most important reform was something called Decree 900, an agrarian reform law that took uncultivated tracts of land away from large landholders and redistributed it to impoverished agricultural workers. It benefited something like 500,000 people, particularly indigenous Guatemalans. The United Fruit Company was not super excited that the Guatemalan government was taking away land that they thought they owned, so they lobbied the U.S. government to overthrow Guzman, which they did through the machinations of the State Department and the CIA. In June of 1954, journalists from around the world started to gather across the border in Honduras, waiting helplessly for any little bit of news to leak out of Guatemala. Evelyn Irons, however, was not content to wait. While her male colleagues were killing time in hotel bars, smoking and drinking, Irons hired a guide and a mule to sneak into Guatemala. The guide would only take her as far as the border between the two countries. He was too afraid to go further, so Irons made her way alone from there, stopping to interview peasants and eventually taking refuge from a storm in a barn where she came face to face with a Guatemalan rebel leader who she'd met on her flight into Honduras, and they traveled together the rest of the way. All in all, she traveled 25 miles, first by mule, then on foot, and eventually in the back of a farmer's pickup, until she reached the rebels' mountain headquarters. And then she broke the story of how the U.S. had backed a coup to overthrow the democratically elected president of Guatemala. An editor from a rival paper, apoplectic that his reporter had been scooped, sent that reporter a telegram that said simply, "Off get ass and on get mule." In 1957, Hanan Swaffer said in the World's Press News, "Evelyn Irons is, in my opinion, the most capable of all of London's woman reporters. Since she arrived in Fleet Street, however, editors have started to ask female aspirants to bylines, 'Do you speak any foreign languages? Could you join a gang fight?'" Irons was named the New York bureau chief for the Sunday Times of London in 1957, and she and Joy moved across the pond, settling into a cozy home with a beautiful garden in Brewster, New York. Irons retired 11 years later, in 1968. Her colleagues had "Off get ass, on get mule" engraved onto a silver platter and presented it to her as a retirement gift. Joy and Evelyn remained together until McSweeney's death in 1988, and Evelyn Irons died of a fast-moving cancer on April 3, 2000, just 2 months short of her 100th birthday. Evelyn Irons lived for the entire span of the 20th century. She had a remarkable life and a career that would be the envy of any journalist, past or present. She went everywhere, she interviewed everyone, and she repeatedly risked her life in her pursuit of the truth. She shattered glass ceilings for women who wanted to work as war and foreign correspondents, and set the bar almost impossibly high for the men who were already doing it. Evelyn Irons should have awards and journalism schools named after her, but after she retired in 1968, her star started to dim almost immediately. To date, no one has even written a comprehensive biography about her. That's it for today. As always, more information, including sources and further reading, is available in the usual place.